Okay, so welcome to video number 2. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Indus River Valley and ancient China. All right, once again, in this video, anytime you see something underlined, hit pause, write it down on your notes. Your notes are going to be what I check off for homework grade in class. All right, so first off, we have the Indus River Valley. It's the third of our 4 ancient river valley civilizations. All right, this river runs right kind of between modern day India and Pakistan. All right, it's the site of another great ancient civilization. So the ancient Indian people pretty much all either lived around the Indus River or the Ganges River, and the Indus is what we're going to be focusing on. Okay. All right, these rivers flooded just like Egypt and just like Mesopotamia, but in India, all right, these rivers are a little more like Egypt in that they knew when it was going to flood. All right, they relied on these floodwaters to provide nutrients so that they could grow their crops. But they were lucky enough that they knew exactly when it was going to flood, just like in Egypt, so they could plan for it. The reason they knew when it was going to flood is because of the monsoons, all right, that kind of define the environment and the climate in India. These monsoons are seasonal winds that either bring rain or dry air. So for half of the year, it's rainy in India, and the other half of the year, there is absolutely zero rain. But this is going to help them, all right, when they are planting their food. In ancient India, also, it's important to note that they are protected by deserts. They're protected by the coastline on one side, and they're also protected by mountains to the north, both to the northeast and the northwest. Okay, when we look at a map of the Indus River Valley, you can see the mountains. All right, the mountains to the kind of northwest of them are called the Hindu Kush Mountains, and if you go a little bit to the east, you get to the Himalayas. The Himalayas are the largest mountains in the world. All right, so because the ancient Indus people are protected by these mountains, they are never really going to have to worry about invaders. Because of this, we don't think they had to fight a whole lot. All right, we actually have found very little evidence that they even had an army. We found way more evidence of toys and just simple tools for housework than we have of weapons. All right, so this was probably a very, very peaceful place to live. All right, moving on. Another thing that's really interesting about the Indus River Valley is they plan their cities on a grid system. Right? When you think about a grid system, think about how most downtowns of major U.S. cities are. Think about uptown Charlotte or New York City. Right? The roads are all straight for the most part. All right, they all either run parallel to each other or perpendicular, making a grid just like you would use grid paper in math class. This shows us that they plan these cities out. Right? If they are going to be able to plan their city out and convince everybody to go along with it, it tells us that they have to have a pretty strong government, right, in order for people to actually listen to that government. All right. It's also interesting to note that not only are their cities planned on a grid system, but the bricks are all made in an exact uniform size. Right? All the bricks are the exact same size. So this would have been a pretty, very nice and neat city to live in. Also, you might want to take note that the earliest Hindu traditions, all right, seem to come from the Indus River Valley. So the beginnings of the Hindu religion, which is one of the modern, most prominent religions in the world. Okay, not only did they plan their cities on a grid system, but they also had indoor plumbing and sewage. Okay, think about how crazy this is. This is 4,000 years ago, and here are cities that had indoor plumbing. Right, my grandmother grew up in the 1940s and 50s here in North Carolina, and she didn't even have indoor plumbing until she was a teenager. All right, so the fact that the ancient Indus River Valley civilizations, that everyone had a toilet and running water in their house is pretty incredible. All right, and this running water, their waste would go basically down a hole, intersect with an aquifer that would wash into the river. So their cities are going to be very, very, very clean. right? They had a written language in the Indus River Valley civilizations, but it's very interesting. We actually cannot translate that language. We have no idea what they were trying to say. Okay, and you can think about why would we not have been able to translate this, and we'll come back to that question in a few minutes. All right, you can see on these stamps on the left side what their written language looked like. It's very interesting. These stamps were actually not even found in the Indus River Valley. Some of them were, but most of them were found in Mesopotamia. This shows us that they did a lot of trading. All right, on the right side, you've got a map of one of the most famous cities there. It's called Mohenjo-Daro. You can see that parts of the city are planned on a grid system. We know there was a wall around the outside, and the most important buildings of the city were all put right in the middle. Okay, so the government buildings and the temples, all right, and their big bathhouse, they were all put in the middle of the city. Okay, and you might wonder why. Maybe it's to keep those buildings safe. My guess is because it's easier for everybody to get to them if they're right in the middle. All right, so this picture right here actually shows us the famous bathhouse in the city of Mohenjo-Daro. Okay, this is a really interesting building. For a long time, historians didn't know what it was, and we wondered. We knew that there was running water here based on the way it was designed, but we wondered really what did they use it for, right? We really don't know. All right, did they just like having an indoor swimming pool? All right, maybe they did. Did they have religious services here and baptisms? Maybe. Did they just take baths here because they were clean? Maybe they did that also. All right, maybe they even got some drinking water here. We really don't know. All right, we might talk about this more in class. Here's another picture of this giant bathhouse. Okay, the last thing I want to make note of about the Indus River Valley is around the year 1750 BCE. These cities seem to kind of just have stopped. People just left. Okay, and I want you to write that down. That the people disappeared from these cities around 1750 BCE. All right, why do you think this happened? Why would everybody just pack up and leave? All right, we don't really quite know why. All right. We can take some guesses. One guess is that they got invaded. We know that they were starting to get invaded by by Indo-Europeans at this time. If they weren't used to fighting, all right, they probably weren't going to stick around to try and fight off these invaders. All right, another guess is that they had a huge earthquake and it shifted the course of the river. All right, and we actually know an earthquake happened at some point. And if the river shifted its course, then maybe all of a sudden their nice planned cities that used to be on either side of a riverbank, maybe now the river's not running right between them. All right, if the river's not running there, then they're going to probably have to move. All right, regardless of why they moved, we know they did move. And this is part of the reason we don't have much evidence of their written language. We know they had a written language, but they didn't leave as much behind as the Mesopotamians or the Egyptians, which is part of the reason why we can't understand it today. Okay, next we're going to talk about the Chinese River Valley civilization. All right, here is a map of China, and on this map you can see the most ancient of all of the Chinese dynasties, called the Shang dynasty. Okay, this river valley civilization formed between the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. Okay, the Yellow River in Chinese is called the Huangpu River. Okay, these two rivers flooded just like all the other river valley civilizations, but China was a little bit more like Mesopotamia because they did not know when it was going to flood. All right. Another thing, you might wonder why the Yellow River would be called the Yellow. It's because the river actually looks a little bit yellow. Right? That's because the soil, the sediment that gets carried down the river comes from Western China, all right, which is not a desert, right, but it's kind of just a big plain area. It's very, very loose, kind of sandy soil that gets washed down the river. So there's no mud on the side of the Yellow River. It's just kind of this loose, sandy stuff, right? You can't really make bricks out of this. So in ancient China, they didn't build stuff out of bricks. They built stuff out of wood. All right, if you guys remember what happened to the three little pig who built his house out of sticks, all right, it got blown down. So in ancient China, they built their everything out of wood, which is not as durable as bricks. And when it floods, all right, which they have no idea when these floods are going to come, all right, their homes and everything is going to get completely destroyed and ruined. Okay, so from a very early time period, the Chinese are going to have to come up with new, inventive ways to deal with the flooding. All right, in ancient China, another thing about them is we have these huge Himalaya mountains to the south. We have more mountains out to the west. Okay, we've a little bit further to the west. There's a big desert. All right, they've got the ocean on one side, and if you go down to the south of them, it's just kind of jungle, kind of rainforest down in modern day Vietnam. Right, so the ancient Chinese were very, very geographically isolated, meaning they did not come into contact with any of the other river valley civilizations. Because of this, they didn't really interact with anybody except for nomadic people who would invade them from time to time. Right. So the ancient Chinese, because of this, they thought they were the best thing on the earth. Right. They thought they were the central of the center of civilization. They thought they were literally better than everybody else. All right. Once again, get everything down here that is underlined. All right. I talked about how they saw their culture as the center of the civilized world. They really thought they were better than everybody. They thought they were the best, the most civilized people. Okay. They're ruled by an emperor. All right. And you might want to write that down even though it's not underlined. All right. They viewed their emperor as having approval from the gods and from their ancestors. Okay. This idea is called the mandate of heaven. The idea that the gods have given the emperor their thumbs up on being the emperor. All right, in ancient China, we also had it's a feudal system. Okay, feudalism is where the king gives land to the nobles. In return, the noble is going to give loyalty and military service. Okay, what this basically means is that the emperor, the king, doesn't really control that much. Right, he's kind of going to let his nobles do what they want to as long as they're loyal to him. All right, another thing about ancient China is that family is very, very important to them. All right, respecting your elders is very important. Okay, the emperors all will be members of a specific dynasty. All right, a dynasty is when different people from the same family are going to be ruling. So when a king or an emperor dies, his son becomes emperor, and then his son, and so on and so on. And in China, they have this thing called the dynastic cycle. All right, and it goes right along with the mandate of heaven. All right, so you have one emperor who rules. All right, all the people think, oh, the gods approve of him. Right, so everything's going good. The government is strong. Everybody's peaceful and prosperous. All right, and people agree that the gods have given him approval. All right, then over time, inevitably bad stuff starts to happen. All right, the government might become corrupt. Taxes might be raised. All right, maybe some natural disasters start to occur. There might be a famine. All right, and when bad things happen, who do people like to blame them on? All right, here in the United States, we like to blame our government. We like to blame the president. All right, even if it's not his fault in reality, all right, we like to blame him. Same thing was true in China. All right, so when bad things start to happen, people start to say, hey, maybe the gods really don't approve of this emperor. So then somebody's going to rise up and overthrow the emperor, and we have a new dynasty that will take charge. And the same cycle repeats itself over and over again. Okay. In ancient China, they had very good irrigation systems to help them with their farming and controlling floodwaters. They have their own written language. They also were some of the first people to make stuff out of bronze and iron. So they had good weapons and they had really good tools. Okay. They also figured out how to get these little tiny worms that were native to China that made this kind of weird material that they kind of actually pooped out. They figured out how to cultivate that and to turn it into silk. Okay. I don't know if any of y'all have anything made out of silk, but it's a very, very fine cloth that is very valuable also. All right, this is what ancient Chinese written language looks like. Okay, and it is somewhat similar to modern day Chinese. All right. One thing that we can tell from this written language is in ancient China, they had thousands and thousands of characters in their language. All right. Think about how many letters we have in our alphabet. All right. I don't even know. I might be wrong. What is it? 24, 26? Um, in ancient China, they had about 5,000 to learn. And for you to be considered even slightly educated, for you to be basically on a kindergarten level, you had to know at least 500 of these characters. So what does that tell us? It tells us that they really valued education. All right, education is very, very important to people in ancient China and still today. All right, so we will continue talking about China and the Indus River Valley in class. All right, make sure you bring your notes to class with you, and I will check this off for a grade.